PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, one of the most prevalent female syndromes out there. Insulin resistance is kind of one of the more hallmark features, dare I say, of PCOS. That's not quite true. Women with insulin resistance, that is like the severest and most, late stage form of PCOS. PCOS occurs much earlier. They tend to have very low progesterone issues, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, very high levels of cortisol. And I think hormone replacement therapy is the antidote to PCOS. Hey guys, welcome back to the Nico Misleh podcast. It's me, Nico Misleh, and I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. For those of you providers who may not know what that is, PCOS, again, one of the most prevalent female syndromes out there. And I don't really think it's aptly named. And I know a lot of you would probably agree with me, especially those of you who have maybe met or seen or diagnosed women with PCOS and who are really more adept at that. PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, the name implies that polycystic ovaries is kind of like the quintessential thing that you would have to see to diagnose PCOS with. And I think this is where even in conventional medicine, I've some of my women's health mentors, the OB-GYNs that I worked with, they've recognized that clearly wasn't always true. Just because you don't see polycystic ovaries or a woman has never come to you with a ruptured cyst or something like that, it doesn't mean that they don't have PCOS. What they do have right is that it is a syndrome in the sense that there are definitely a lot of things sort of contributing to what appears to be this condition that females suffer from. So in the broadest of senses, PCOS is almost always seen as a problem with insulin resistance, which is true, by the way. Insulin resistance is kind of one of the more hallmark features, dare I say, of PCOS. However, I think what happens is a lot of us then start viewing PCOS through the lens of insulin resistance being the root cause, so to speak. And again, I'm not trying to be petty with that. What I'm trying to get at is that that's not quite true. It's kind of the latter half of what I would consider PCOS, meaning women with insulin resistance, that is like the severest and most, late stage form of PCOS. PCOS occurs much earlier, right? It takes a while for a woman to get to a point where she is in fact insulin resistant. And to get to that point, it's not just a matter of poor diet. And again, this is where I think I have to be careful with what I'm saying here. I am not saying that diet doesn't influence PCOS. It absolutely does, 100%. The modern American diet is terrible. I mean, it's just full of processed foods and garbage and very calorically dense and very low nutrients. That's what we see in the American diet. Right? There's tons of energy coming in. There's just no nutrients with it. And so people are starved of nutrients. And unfortunately, then, we get into certainly things like metabolic syndromes and ultimately things like PCOS. But it doesn't just start there, right? I mean, I'm talking about in the decades prior, like from infancy up into, teenage years and beyond, like that is where PCOS is really forming. And I really mean that. I believe that. I believe that to be the case just from the women I've seen with PCOS and based on some of the literature that I've looked at. And I feel confident enough to say that because women with PCOS, a lot of times they're not exorbitantly diabetic when they come and see you. In fact, most of the young women who come to see me, you'd be surprised that they have PCOS. A lot of these women are not overweight. They don't have hirsutism, right? Hair growth. They don't have, irregular menses necessarily. Like a lot of the, again, more stereotypical signs and symptoms that you might find in a more late stage PCOS gal, you're not going to find early on. What you will tend to find is that they tend to have very low progesterone issues. They tend to have a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. They have a lot of mental health components. I feel like that's kind of the underpinnings a lot of times. What you will also see is they tend to have very significant stressors in their lives, whether it's acute or chronic. Maybe some traumatic moments that they've experienced in their childhood and early years that have kind of imprinted on them and in many ways have driven their flight or fight response through the roof. So we see a lot of those women with kind of that cortisol pumping, Cushing's disease, dare I say, type of syndrome. And I think PCOS and Cushing's syndrome are actually quite similar. In fact, they are almost practically the same thing. And I'm going to get to that here. What I mean by that is PCOS actually starts with hormone disruption, but not on the insulin resistance side of things, way before then. It starts with typically very high stress and very poor adaptation to that stress. And in the sense of hormones, what I'm considering is dysregulated cortisol, usually, very high levels of cortisol and usually adrenaline and norepinephrine and things like that, right? Just very stimulated adrenergic response, which then dysregulates blood sugars. Increased cortisol, increased stress is going to do what to your gut lining? Well, it's going to kind of peel it apart a little bit. It's going to expose pathogens from the inside the gut, like, gram-negative bacteria that produce things like lipopolysaccharides or LPS. It's going to have those bacteria pump that stuff outside the gut, right? Through those little teeny gap junctions in the gut. And what we end up with is now these little molecules, lipopolysaccharides or LPS, we call them endotoxins. And if you think that sounds kooky, I thought it did too when I first read about it, but they are very well studied and they're all over the literature. Endotoxins being one of the most destructive things within the human organism that is unfortunately not produced by us, but by our neighbors in our gut, our bacteria, our microbiome. And again, we always have a little bit of that stuff going on, but if it builds to higher levels and the gut is stressed and we get a, peeling apart of that gut lining and exposing that gut lining to, basically what is the inside out world of your human organism, and we start leaking out these endotoxins, well, they basically act like little tiny germs. And they have extremely potent reactions in the immune system. They flare up cytokines and interleukin 6 and all these really highly inflammatory products they will produce. When we produce those inflammatory products, we stimulate estrogen. Why? Because our cells are being injured. And estrogen, ironically, will also start catapulting more of an inflammatory response. Estrogen at large is very histaminergic. It actually supports the drive of the cells to, seek help by asking for inflammation to occur, by releasing histamine. So again, the body's trying to actually help in this specific situation. But unfortunately, because it is chronic and traumatic and so destructive, it's now going to put itself in a vicious cycle. So estrogen comes up. Estrogen, by the way, tickles glucocorticoid receptors, which causes our body to respond with more cortisol, which then does what to your blood sugars? Further dysregulates them. And what two things massively protect the human organism from this whole catastrophic event? Two things in particular, thyroid and progesterone. Think of thyroid and progesterone as really two of our most potent anti-stress, anabolic, pro-metabolic hormones. And they work in great synchronicity with each other, right? Progesterone influences thyroid, thyroid influences progesterone. The thyroid is in charge of stimulating and arguably protecting the entire human organism at a cellular level in terms of energy production. And if you've taken HRT University, you should know that energy is the currency of life. is really freaking important. It's so important that I spend a lot of time talking about metabolism, because if you don't understand that the principle of energy is the currency of life, and that energy is what helps hold our whole body and our whole universe together and keeps it from falling apart, then you would understand that we need to seek balance in our human organism by promoting what hormones are actually ready to be disposed for us to heal from that chaos and disorder and energy leaking, right? So progesterone and thyroid are massively important. Progesterone helps balance estrogen in the broadest of senses, right? Progesterone helps decrease inflammation. It helps modulate the immune system. It helps heal our gut lining. Thyroid as well. Thyroid helps keep the entire GI tract mobile and active. Thyroid helps increase energy production at a cellular level, which means it's going to heal much more quickly, get rid of reactive oxidative species. The more energy, the better. We need progesterone and thyroid. And in fact, the lack of progesterone and thyroid is arguably what stimulates all this stuff anyways, because we have that sudden stress response with cortisol. So if you're following me here, because I know this is deep, deep, deep stuff, what I hope you're recognizing is that progesterone and thyroid are massively important, and the root cause of PCOS starts before insulin resistance. It is now because we have dysregulated cortisol and dysregulated estrogen with a thyroid and progesterone insufficiency that we are left with dysregulated blood sugars, which is going to do what to our fasting insulin? Increase it. And is doing what to our metabolism? It's destroying our metabolism. And then we start ending up with insulin resistance, elevated blood sugars, potentially elevated A1Cs. And then, of course, that's typically when we're going to start seeing things like dysregulated menstrual cycles and hirsutism, right? Because our sex hormone binding globulin is getting obliterated because our blood sugars are so out of control. And our testosterone and DHA are now through the roof. And what we know now in the literature is that it appears that most women with PCOS have a little bit of progesterone resistance, just like women can have insulin resistance. So now not only is the body probably not producing enough progesterone, but whatever progesterone is producing, it's not doing a damn bit of good because we have progesterone resistance. And so what happens with women with PCOS? Well, as they continue to age, things get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, fortunately, a lot of my female patients are very active and healthy. And again, if you saw them, it would be difficult to really recognize whether or not they have PCOS. I mean, I've literally walked by women in public and thought, that woman has PCOS. I can see it. I see it as clear as day. The hirsutism, the obesity, the fatigue, and whatever is pretty obvious. And I think that unfortunately we can recognize that, but it doesn't do us any service. It doesn't do them any service because, again, what we should be doing is recognizing that 10 years before that poor female ends up in that position. And by the way, I understand that if your diet and lifestyle are not optimal, well, she probably was going to end up there either way. But I'm talking about women who do have optimal diets and lifestyles. PCOS, much like the rampant epidemic of hypogonadism in men because of xenoestrogens and disrupting chemicals, where we're seeing that same thing cross over to women. A hypogonadal man, frankly, looks a lot like a patient with Cushing's syndrome also. They tend to have more truncal obesity. They tend to be tired and fatigued. They tend to be more depressed, more anxious. They tend to not carry any muscle mass. Doesn't that kind of sound like a woman with PCOS? I think this stuff is so interesting because I see this crossover of syndromes and I actually think they both have a very similar root cause. And I think the same variables like xenoestrogens and endocrine disrupting chemicals are also compounding on this. Did PCOS exist 20 or 30 years ago? Yes. At the same rates as it is today? No. What about 60 years ago? Did it exist? Absolutely. At the rates in which it is now? No. At the rates it was 30 years ago? No, definitely not. What about hypogonadism? Same thing. It's getting worse over time. I'm not saying that they never existed, ever. I mean, hopefully they didn't ever, but I think for as long as humans have been around, there's probably always been PCOS and hypogonadism. But I think these things are getting significantly worse over time. I don't think we're getting better at necessarily even diagnosing them. I think, in fact, I would say most people are underdiagnosed when it comes to hypogonadism and even PCOS, truly. Unfortunately, we go about treating both of them inappropriately most of the time. Hypogonadism, a little bit easier. PCOS, unfortunately, I think is a little more challenging. I think a lot of people immediately pursue improving insulin resistance, which, by the way, is very important and very key to do, especially in women in severe states of PCOS with significant obesity and insulin resistance. But in those gals who are not quite there yet, we don't necessarily need to start them on a GLP-1 or metformin even. What we probably need to do is give them progesterone and thyroid and potentially even try to find a way to decrease stress levels, right? Maybe we do need to have some lifestyle interventions and stuff there. I'm not discounting that. I never discount lifestyle and diet. Those are the two most important interventions behind everything, of course. But I'm also not going to allow these women to just sit by the wayside. And they're telling me, Nico, I don't know, my cycles, sometimes they're just not super regular, or maybe I do have a little bit of a mustache, but I just lasered off. It's no big deal. I'm not super overweight, but I do gain weight kind of easily. Like, okay, it sounds like you have PCOS. Have you ever been told you have PCOS? No, Nico, never. And I look at her labs, and sure enough, her DHA's on the higher side. It might not be above the reference range, but it's kind of high. And maybe her free testosterone is kind of high. Not above the reference range, but just kind of high for a young gal. And maybe her androgen receptors are actually really sensitive and she has very low SHBG because her fasting insulin is starting to creep up a little bit. You see what I'm getting at here? I want to be able to treat women much earlier, and I want you to be able to spot it earlier. PCOS. I, of course, want you to help women in more severe states. And frankly, I think that's a lot more straightforward. I mean, we really do need to give those women likely GLP-1s or metformin or some sort of, we have to try to help them lose weight and get out of that insulin resistance mess. But for those younger gals, or for those gals who are just not in such a severe state, it is absolutely possible to help them get out of that by just adding thyroid and progesterone in. It is amazing the power of those two, what they can do together. Absolutely extraordinary. You know, I see a lot of people telling women with PCOS, like, don't eat carbs. And I think that's bonkers too. Again, it's logical. I understand where they're coming from. Your blood sugars are dysregulated. It is probably not in your best interest to eat sugar. But what's interesting is that blood sugar, blood glucose, is still and always will be the life source for your cells, the substrate from which it derives the most energy efficiency. It's not the sugar's fault. It's just that your cells cannot process that sugar right now because you're in such metabolic distress. And by giving you bioidentical hormones that are pro-metabolic, that improve metabolism, that help you lose weight, that help you decrease your estrogen levels and cortisol levels, and you start adhering to different lifestyle interventions, not eating so much processed foods, staying away from things that are highly inflammatory and highly oxidized, like polyunsaturated fatty acids, taking things in addition to progesterone, things like vitamin E, myoinositol, thiamine, Vitamin B1, amazing for PCOS. I touch on all of these in the course because they're actually really, really helpful for PCOS. And ironically, they all counteract the environmental toxins and or poor dietary choices that led to either the beginnings or the later stages of PCOS. Nutrients are massively important here, and I think they're wildly underplayed in these patients. And I think hormone replacement therapy is the antidote to PCOS. Outside of diet, lifestyle, and maybe another intervention like a GLP-1, hormones are critical. And I think they're totally underserved on that front. I really do. Ironically, I see oral birth control being given out like candy to women with PCOS. And again, I understand the logic of, hey, let's just shut down your own production of hormones. That's what birth control does. We'll just shut off all your hormones so that you feel better. Well, could it improve some symptoms? Yeah. Is it just masking PCOS? Absolutely. It's not getting rid of PCOS. It's just putting a Band-Aid over it. And you're hoping, then literally, it's like we're hoping not to look under the Band-Aid. Don't peel it back. You'll still find PCOS. Most women, they start on birth control with PCOS, they get worse over time. I mean, honestly, the studies that I share in HRT University show that women who take oral contraceptives have a greater likelihood of metabolic dysfunction over time. Of course, it's not going to happen in a week. But what happens if I get rid of all of your endogenous progesterone and estradiol that you're supposed to produce? Not good things, especially over years, 10, 20 years, 30 years. Some of these women take these oral contraceptives. Ironically, again, so ironic, you just need to give bioidentical hormones, and that, in fact, unmasks the problem and addresses literally the situation at large. That's why I'm such a big fan of progesterone and thyroid. I think it's silly not to give that to women with PCOS. I really do. I think it's, in fact, negligence not to provide that. Based on the information that I've seen and the literature that I've read, and this is what I'm putting together in the Advanced Female HRT course. You need to understand the foundations. You need to understand what estradiol is and what progesterone is and what thyroid is and why. Why do we give these medications? Why does improving metabolism have such a profound impact on things like hypogonadism and PCOS and endometriosis? And I'm not asking why to make you feel silly. I'm asking why because I want you to feel empowered. I want your patients to feel empowered. They need to know, and so do you. You're the expert. You're the master of hormone replacement therapy. And I want you to just crush it when you're standing in front of your patients and when you're actually telling them why they have PCOS and how you can help and how it's going to be super different from any other time they've likely tried to improve their life. And instead of being offered birth control or metformin just willy-nilly, they're being given real answers and real solutions, novel solutions that not only make their symptoms improve, but their actual quality of life and health span improve. I always tell people this, like, look, I can give a lot of things to get rid of symptoms. I can give you a shitload of benzodiazepines to get rid of your anxiety. And it works. But does that improve your quality of life long term? No, it does not. Does it increase your risk of becoming an alcoholic? It does, believe it or not. Does it increase your risk of damaging your central nervous system, specifically your brain? Yes, it does. Is it addictive? Sure. Can be. I can go on and on there. Well, what if you're anxious because your progesterone is low and I give you progesterone and your anxiety gets better and you also have more energy and you sleep better and you feel less irritable and you have better relationships with your friends and your family and your kids because you feel less irritable? Do you see what I'm saying? There's a positive health trajectory when we utilize something that is the appropriate therapy. That's the best way to tell. Is this therapy the most appropriate therapy? I'm not saying whether or not it is therapeutic. Does benzodiazepine therapeutically relieve anxiety? Absolutely. Is it the most appropriate therapy to relieve anxiety? No. Not if that woman has progesterone insufficiency. And all it takes is a little blood test to figure that out, and just asking about her symptoms, right? Anxiety is too vague. What if she's also suffering from insomnia and irritability, and maybe her cycles are irregular? I don't know. Did you ask? Anxiety is not just make-believe. It didn't just literally come out of nowhere. There has to be something going on here. And we see in the clinical literature that progesterone greatly improves the mental health of female patients. And that is why I want to make it so clear to you that things like PCOS, I want you to be able to start catching them early so that we don't have to start constantly with the dumpster fire types of patients that walk in with PCOS. God love them. And you're going to help them too, of course. But I want to start getting better. I want to start getting better at communicating between colleagues, you and I, and communicating between the provider and the patient about PCOS. And sure, we don't know absolutely everything about it. It's a syndrome, right? I mean, there are multiple variables that can lead to this. But I know it doesn't just start with drinking 2 liters and eating bags of potato chips when we end up this way. That is a totally different thing altogether. I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is I have healthy females who do all the right things and they have PCOS. They eat well, they sleep well, they are taking care of themselves, and they typically don't look like they have PCOS. But it is a struggle for them. Every day is a struggle for them. Every week is a struggle. Every month is a struggle. And it will catch up with them. Unfortunately, that's just how it works. It is really hard to out diet and out lifestyle PCOS in and of itself. Why? Because there are these freaking endocrine disrupting chemicals and xenoestrogens and all these other things that we just can't seem to escape. And these issues may have began in utero. This is why it's so difficult these days. We can't just write patients off just because, we think, or we gaslight them into thinking that something's wrong with their diet or lifestyle. We all have stuff wrong with our diets and lifestyles. Come on, give me a break. We're not all perfect there. But when a patient's telling you they're trying and they really mean that sincerely, I believe them. And I understand that, much like them, I was born behind the 8 ball too. Is my testosterone level as good as my dad's or my grandfather's? No. You know why? Because I was born in 1990. And I had years of intrauterine exposure to phthalates and PFAs and all kinds of nasty crap. And we see that generationally. This is an epidemic. It's not. It's a pandemic. It's all across the world, basically. So, again, I'm not a big fan of making people victims of their circumstances and whatnot. That's not the message here. I think there's some balance here. I think there's this idea that I don't want you to feel like a victim, and I want you to be able to pick yourself up by your bootstraps a little bit, but I also want you to know that, hey, this isn't always 110% your fault. Sometimes it happened before your consent. I didn't ask my mom to heat up plastic Tupperware in a microwave and then eat out of it while she was pregnant with me. And she didn't mean to either. She didn't know any better. So let's give some grace. But here's what we can do to make this significantly better is that I can give you the most appropriate therapy, which is the therapy that will not only resolve symptoms, but also significantly improve your quality of life, both in the short term and the long term. That is the marker of an appropriate therapy. And I believe you are doing people a disservice if you can't find ways to implement hormone replacement therapy with some of these conditions. I go into what we're looking for specifically in the advanced female course. It's going to be coming out. We're shooting for early November, guys. So like, just be aware. We're going to start hearing some messaging around this. Okay. We've got accreditation coming around the corner and stuff. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up with HRT University. But if you like this stuff, if you find this really interesting, I hope it wasn't totally over your head, guys. But if you find this stuff really interesting, I go deeper and probably even with more clarity, because I have all the studies and stuff listed there. And I want to show you what PCOS really is and describe it to you in even better detail and show you how to utilize these hormones appropriately, and also nutraceuticals and things like that. I want to make it really holistic. We even touch on GLP-1s. I even talk about like microdosing those things. Like I'm a big fan of all that stuff, metformin, berberine, whatever, vitamin E, thiamine. I want to touch on all these things. I want you to approach your patients with that expert level, that confidence that is unshakable. And they're like, oh, thank God you are who you are. Like, I'm so glad I finally found you, because I got to be honest with you. I've been that patient who's seen 15 different providers, and I've seen my OB-GYN and my PCP, and they all just gaslight the shit out of me, or they don't believe me, or they tell me I'm fine and I'm not fine and I need help. And you're going to be that person that's going to save the day. And it's awesome. I want you to be that person. We need way more of you. We need so many more of you. Okay. This market is not completely tapped out. It's not even close. We haven't even scratched the surface yet of the things that we can do for people with hormone replacement therapy. Endometriosis, OCD, postpartum depression, PCOS, you name it. I'm going to talk about it in the advanced female course, because I want you to understand how powerful these hormones are. They have a meaning and a purpose and a place in all of our lives at almost any given time. And I think, again, it's a shame that we don't use them enough. And I want to get rid of that. You know my goal, right? My mission is to help as many providers in the entire world learn to grow and love and understand hormone replacement therapy, so that we can do better for our patients and provide unbelievable value and service to them. And by the way, make a great living doing it and not feel ashamed by that. Because we can literally, I sleep really well at night, guys. I love giving hormones to people because their lives get better. I never felt that way when I was doing conventional med, ever. I hated it. It's the best feeling in the world. And I selfishly want you to be a part of that. I love you guys, and I want you to be the best versions of yourselves. If you're not on hormones, maybe you should look into that too. If any of this stuff was like, oh my God, Nico, it feels like you're talking to me. Maybe you have PCOS. Maybe it should be your own science experiment. See how much of a change you'll experience when you utilize hormone replacement therapy, the most appropriate therapy in this situation. All right, guys, I'll stop rambling. I hope that was interesting. Don't forget to check out my daily email, Nico's daily email. It's linked in the show notes below. Take a peek at it. It's amazing. I write an email literally Monday through Friday, as you know. That daily email's going to touch on hormone replacement therapy, business stuff, medicine at large. It's a great place to just learn and get some great value for free, totally for free. We have the Facebook group, Nico's HRT University, which is open to the public in terms of providers. If you're a licensed provider, you can join. And then also don't forget our website, HRTuniversity.com. Check out all the amazing things we have to offer there. The master course, which is our creme de la creme, chef's kiss. It's amazing. We have our monthly membership calls and Q&A and Pearl. That's in our membership package, which is wonderful. Imagine it's like a super cheap way to get amazing mentorship from me and my team. It's awesome. It's a great value. Pearl's our AI mentor. She's going to be coming out again when we get CEUs, so she can help you with all sorts of questions and things. If you have those burning questions and you don't have time to ask someone, she's amazing. She knows all my material. She can find it in the course for you. She's just a breath of fresh air. So we got a lot of great things there. We've got our preferred vendors. Check them out. You don't even have to be a part of HRT University necessarily to utilize our preferred vendors. We love these guys. We trust them with our businesses and with our lives in many ways. And they're amazing people. So guys, thank you so much for listening. It's a Friday afternoon. I'm going to hop off and go spend time with my beautiful family. And I hope you do too. Take care, guys.